So great question, and I apologize. I was in the back, so I couldn't hear all of the exciting things that were going on before. But I think, clinical trials today are really giving us an opportunity in many of those trials for people to access up and coming novel approaches to treatment that may really be tomorrow's blockbuster. And they're so incredibly important, but they only help, or really most help, when we engage in them, when we enroll in them, when we take part in them, whether they're a cohort study or a biobanking study or a big registration trial that leads to an FDA approval. So I would love to talk more about it. Let me know, Keith, if you want me to share my screen and go through the.
Yes, let's see what you have for us.
Okay, sounds great. And you'll have to let me know. Can you see the proper screen?
I think your desktop is
Okay. Well, then let me see if I can switch what I'm sharing. Give me 1 second. Can you see the screen now or not?
yes.
You can. Okay, great. Thank you for your patience, everybody. I am really excited to talk to everyone about where clinical trials are leading us. And for those who don't know me, I am a medical oncologist at Dana-Farber, just across town from Dr. Lee. And everything important that I actually learned from Dr. Lee a few years ago when he was my teacher, and still is, I guess. So here are my disclosures. And what we'll talk about when it comes to clinical research is why inclusion matters first. I think this is a really important concept for patients and people to think about, and for loved ones to think about, because if you're not included, if you're not counted, if you're not part of the progress, we don't necessarily know all that we can about you, about your cancer, about how to really ensure that everybody is going to benefit from these treatments. Then I'm going to go into some ongoing trials to watch, with really actually quite a number of different trials, but it's only a smattering. There is no way in this brief time that I could include every single trial of importance. So I've just chosen a few, but please, if you think about a trial that is important to you, that you've been offered, that you hear may be important, and it's not in my list, that doesn't mean it's not important. It means that I ran out of time and can't include everything. And then I'm just briefly at the end going to mention what I think is one of the most helpful tools for people trying to engage in clinical research, fendtrials.com. And I think we'll hear more about this from Keith at the end. So why does this even matter? A number of years ago, you can see this is dated 2015 at the top. So it's been a long time coming. Some of our colleagues, or my colleagues, Dr. Lee's colleagues, who were at Memorial Sloan Kettering in New York at the time, and now are in various cancer centers, looked at a bunch of different clinical trials, and those are listed in the top of this table. You can see sipuleucel-T, radium-223, enzalutamide, and abiraterone, and lots of different trials, multiple trials listed across here, as well as cabazitaxel. And what they did was look at the total number of patients who were enrolled, and about 7,200 patients were enrolled in these randomized clinical trials back in the earlier part of the 2000s here. But the percentage of Black patients who were actually enrolled in these trials was about 3% of all patients, which is a gross underrepresentation of these patients in our clinics and in the world, of course. And of those patients, remember, some of these trials had a randomization that would randomize patients to the treatment arm and then to the best standard of care arm. So in many of them, only half of the patients actually ended up getting the new and innovative treatment that ended up being approved by the FDA. And all of these trials led to FDA approvals. And only 150 total patients out of the 7,275 patients who were enrolled in these clinical trials ended up being Black patients who actually got the treatment drug that ended up getting approved. And to me, that is, if nothing else, the clearest reason that we need everybody to get engaged in these trials, because everybody should be involved in the development of these drugs, and everybody should have access to those drugs on the back end. And we should know if the side effects are different in different people, if the effectiveness is different in different people. We should have that information from the clinical trials that lead to these drugs being approved. And if we've got the number that was expected, it would at least be 673, if not more. So there are a lot of different types of trials. The trials that I just mentioned were clinical trials that led to drug approvals. But I want everyone to also remember that there are all kinds of different studies. Real world studies are studies that sometimes have a lower bar for inclusion, meaning that more people can get involved. You don't have to be the healthiest of healthy patients. You don't have to be the patient who comes in extra days. You don't have to take extra blood work and everything. You can get involved in some of these real world studies just by doing your normal routine things in the clinic. These include things like pragmatic clinical trials that are really mirrors of the regular standard of care, but might integrate a new treatment, or registry studies where all you have to do is sign your name on the dotted line, and sometimes specimens or samples from your tumor tissue or blood that wasn't used in the clinical practice that you've been getting routinely, the clinical care, that could be saved somewhere and used for future studies. Sometimes your insurance data can be used, meaning not that anybody's looking at your insurance status, but that the claims, the things that were billed within Medicare, as an example, are counted and tabulated, and we can use that information to make an understanding from a population perspective how different treatments work over time. And there are patient surveys and patient registries that also give us an opportunity to engage, just even as patients, writing things down. How do I feel? What treatments have I had? And those responses in patient surveys can also be wonderful ways and important ways to engage in clinical research. These real world studies may not always be interventional, meaning they don't always have that latest and greatest drug, and they're often performed in routine practice settings with really minimal restrictions and with broad inclusion criteria, but they help us as doctors and patients understand how effective a drug is in the real world, in real people, rather than just what we call efficacy in a clinical trial, which is really set up to understand the side effects and the benefits in a different and differently calculated way. And real world studies need you too. And so that's why I wanted to make sure to mention those as well, because they are highly informative and really useful in practice. Here's an example of a real world study. Now, this is a bit of a complicated slide showing survival curves and showing some different forest plots here. But what I'm trying to point out is that within this trial that looked at how people have cancer progression on different treatments, those are over on the left, some of our most commonly used therapies, darolutamide, enzalutamide, and apalutamide. These investigators looked at the length of time that people were on drug and how long it took for these drugs to, how long these drugs could control the disease, and then looked at differences between Black patients and white patients, and to try to understand in big populations, does it work better in one population than another? And this trial, like actually most of our trials, say that these drugs work equally regardless of someone's self-identified race, and sometimes actually work a little bit better in people who self-identify as Black. So these kinds of analyses are really helpful because we need to be aware and then to tell our patients, regardless of their skin color, this drug will work, or your skin color actually suggests, or your self-identified race suggests this drug's actually going to work better on you. So let's see what we can do to help make this drug tolerable and helpful for you in your everyday life. There are disparities in things like genetic testing that also need to be corrected, need to be dealt with in our clinical trials. Genetic testing is something that's increasingly important so that we can understand which treatment options might be available, and also to tell people what genes might be in their families that might give their family members a higher risk of things like prostate cancer, but also breast cancer, ovarian cancer, pancreatic cancer, colon cancer, and some others. So doing this genetic testing and doing it broadly in all people is really, really important, because if we only understand the genetics of one race, then certainly we cannot make those extrapolations or make suppositions about these genes in other self-identified races. So in undergoing genetic testing can help us in clinic understand options for treatment, but also can allow participation in treatment trials if you need to have certain mutations to get in, as well as real world studies. So some of the information that we know about people getting counted or not in these trials is that a few years ago, there was a report looking at how commonly we had samples of people by different race in the United States. And we found that the only group that had enough samples to actually make some conclusions were patients of white race. We did not have sufficient samples in any other race, Black, Hispanic, Asian, Native American, or American Indian, to actually draw conclusions or have sufficient information to do really cutting edge research and understanding. And this is across multiple cancer types. As you can see on the right-hand side of the slide, different cancers are listed, including prostate cancer, which is sort of the light tan, but also lung cancer, head and neck cancer, colon cancer, and others. So we need to participate because we need to understand these things for all people. So let's dig into some of the clinical trials that are exciting. Now that I've explained a problem, we need more people in clinical trials. We need people of all races. We need people from all backgrounds. Radioligands are a really fascinating group of treatments that we are excited about in prostate cancer care, and they're being studied across many stages of prostate cancer. So this schema is trying to identify or map out the progression from localized prostate cancer on the left through metastatic prostate cancer in the middle, and then more advanced metastatic prostate cancer, castration-resistant metastatic prostate cancer, sort of towards the right. And below the arrow, we can see lots of different trial names for radiopharmaceuticals. And in this case, this is a list of PSMA protein targeted radioactive infused agents or radiopharmaceuticals. You can see that this includes some trials that led to drug approval, like Vision, and others that are waiting in the wings. We're waiting to hear the data from the study here in the middle, PSMA Edition. And there's PSMA DC and Splash and PSMA4 and Eclipse, multiple others, and there's many that aren't listed, but this is a really hot area of research. Well, what are these drugs? The most commonly talked about drug at this point, the radioligand therapy that we hear most about, is also called Pluvicto. And this drug is PSMA, a PSMA targeted drug, also known as lutetium-177, PSMA 617. That's a mouthful. That's why we often call it Pluvicto. But this schematic tries to explain a little bit about what that is. So if we look on the right-hand side of the slide at that purple box-like entity, that is a PSMA targeting molecule. What is PSMA? It's a protein on the prostate cancer cell. Those are those brown things in the middle. There's a blue protein there that purple PSMA target of PSMA 617 pops into. And what does the PSMA 617 have attached to it? A radioactive particle called lutetium-177. So that little attached PSMA 617 molecule then lands on the prostate cancer cell, binds to that PSMA protein, and brings with it a radioactive molecule that radiates all those cells and hopefully kills them. So in general, PSMA-targeted radioactive treatments, whether they have lutetium-177 on them or something else, attach to PSMA protein and radiate the cancer cells. These are really exciting. So a couple of these studies to just mention that are ongoing clinical trials include that study that I mentioned, PSMA Edition. This includes patients who have new metastatic prostate cancer and treats them with the standard of care treatment, which is ADT, hormone-lowering medicine, plus an AR pathway inhibitor like apalutamide or enzalutamide, or some others. And half the patients also get this lutetium-177, PSMA 617, or Pluvicto. And the goal is to understand if we use this radioactive medicine at the get-go, at the jump, when patients have new metastatic prostate cancer, can we prolong the time for the cancer to grow? And we saw a press release, because this study enrolled and it did really well. A press release in June of this year said it's a positive trial. Pluvicto does help control the cancer for longer than hormonal treatment alone, the ADT and the AR pathway inhibitor hormonal medicines for that newly diagnosed metastatic prostate cancer. So we're waiting to see the real data. Doctors can't act on press releases. We need to see some real data, but this is really exciting. Another study just to be aware of is another PSMA targeted radioactive treatment, also has that lutetium-177 radioactive agent. This included patients who have metastatic castration-resistant prostate cancer, so a little more advanced, who had already had an AR pathway inhibitor like enzalutamide or abiraterone or apalutamide, and now have progression of their cancer. And these patients got the alternate AR pathway inhibitor like enzalutamide if they'd had abiraterone or vice versa, versus the lutetium-177 PSMA INT drug, a little different drug than Pluvicto, but similar in many ways. And this study, there was a press release that says it's also a positive trial. So this different radioactive radiopharmaceutical helps to control the cancer for longer than hormonal treatment alone for castration-resistant metastatic prostate cancer before chemo. Again, we're waiting for the primary data on this, but another positive trial for radioligand therapy. PSMA DC is another one I wanted you to be aware of. This is looking at radioactive radioligand therapy, but in a biochemical recurrence space. This is in patients who have already had a prostatectomy or may have already had radiation. The cancer's coming back, and they can see a small amount of it on a PSMA PET scan, one of those most sensitive scans that can help us see the cancer when it's otherwise not visible. And what patients in this study are getting are targeted radiation to all those spots that they can see, or lutetium-177 PSMA 617, also called Pluvicto. What's important about this study is that it is one of the largest and one of the first of these large studies to avoid giving androgen deprivation therapy. It does not give medicines to lower testosterone, to see if we can get this cancer control without using castration. So we're very excited to see how this may go. We don't know yet. The study is just enrolling now. So it's really asking, can Pluvicto delay cancer progression for recurrent prostate cancer without castration? We don't know. It's enrolling now, and I'm hopeful that it can. So here's another one just to round out some of these Pluvicto trials. This is called PSMA and AR pathway inhibitor. It's looking at some patients with metastatic disease. Again, looking at Pluvicto, and this is saying, is Pluvicto better at delaying cancer progression when the cancer comes back with hormonal pills, with those AR pathway inhibitor drugs? If we give them together, does it work even better? And so we'll see, enrolling now. And the same group also has a study called PSMA Action. It's looking at a different radioactive molecule, actinium-225. So looking, rather than at lutetium-177, looking at a different way to radiate those cells, still attacking the PSMA protein on the prostate cancer cell surface, because we've had good success with that so far. So this is asking, can a new form of radioligand treatment with actinium delay cancer progression, enrolling now as well? So let's shift gears a little bit away from radioactive therapies. This drug that I want to share is called mevrometostat. It's a targeted EZH2 inhibitor. That's a mouthful, so let's break it down a little bit. EZH2 is a protein that is common in cancer cells, especially when they're advanced, especially when they're resistant, and it's associated with aggressive cancer. And mevrometostat is just a drug that targets that protein. It's a targeted drug. Targeted therapy is trying to knock out that protein's activity. And early studies show that when it's combined with drugs like enzalutamide, a tried and true treatment for prostate cancer, it may be pretty active. So the drug is being studied in combination with enzalutamide, both in patients who have not had chemotherapy exposure in metastatic castration-resistant prostate cancer, and in people who may have even an earlier stage. So multiple trials here looking at this, but we will, I think, have some answers soon. Can a new form of this targeted treatment delay cancer progression in advanced prostate cancer? And this one's enrolling now. So here's another one to share with you. This is opevesostat. So another complicated name, but this one stops steroid production. Testosterone is a steroid. So this drug stops testosterone from being made by the adrenal glands. If you look on the left-hand side, you can see the bladder, you could see the testicles there, you could see all the way up at the top, two little kidney beans with two little brown flecks on top of them. Those flecks are the adrenal glands in this cartoon. The adrenal glands make testosterone just like the testes do, about 10% in the body. And so this drug is trying to stop the adrenal glands from making testosterone, just like another drug that we already have called abiraterone or Zytiga, But this one is trying to do it a little bit more effectively, a little bit further upstream to try to get those levels even further suppressed. So they're hoping that this one's going to work. And it seems to be effective even after drugs like abiraterone stop working. And so it's being tested in 2 large registration trials. These are going for FDA approval. So we're going to see, can this new form of targeted treatment delay cancer progression in advanced castration-resistant prostate cancer? It's also enrolling. Capivasertib is another mouthful of a drug, but this one is another targeted agent. It's looking to stop the PI3 kinase AKT-mTOR pathway. So what does that mean? This pathway, PI3 kinase, AKT, and mTOR, is a signaling pathway inside our cells that's often revved up when these cells become cancerous. And it can help cells live longer, grow faster, and do more damage. And if cells have a problem with another protein called PTEN, this pathway can be really upregulated and out of control. So capivasertib is a drug that when used, we think, in people who don't have a good PTEN protein, can maybe harness that vulnerability of that PTEN deficiency, where the cells are even more dependent on this PI3 kinase AKT pathway, and inhibit that and knock those cells down. So here's a large trial. This is a phase 3. It's trying to get FDA approval. And we actually heard that in this hormone-sensitive trial, a press release said it's a positive trial. Capivasertib plus abiraterone helps to control the cancer for longer than abiraterone alone for patients with new metastatic prostate cancer who have that PTEN loss. So we have only seen the press release, looking forward to the data, but another trial that's poised to tell us that there's a win in prostate cancer. So just a couple more left. Human kallikrein-2 or KLK2 is a protein that is present on high levels in prostate cancer cells. And it's actually not really found on cells around prostate cancer. So this gives us an in. It gives us a special target that's on the thing that we want to kill and is not on the other healthy tissues. So it's under investigation as a target for things like radioligand therapy, T-cell engager therapies, CAR T-cell treatments as well. Immune approaches, radioactive approaches, all of them are trying to target the same protein. So really exciting here. And there are ongoing studies evaluating KLK2 with pasritamig in advanced castration-resistant prostate cancer that we saw at a summer meeting this year. It looks really exciting. And the side effect profile does not look so bad. So I am definitely on the lookout to see where this one goes. So let's just mention a couple other mechanisms here. We know that chemotherapy can work in prostate cancer, but it has side effects. There are targeted chemos now that use antibodies to target those special proteins on prostate cancer cells that are not present elsewhere to try to get that chemo right to where it needs to go. This is a list of just some: TROP2, CD46, PSMA that we've already heard about, B7H3, lots of drug development here going after these proteins and targeting chemo or targeting other things there as well. So ongoing studies for many of these approaches. And so just to wrap up here, I just want to share, I could not come close to showing all of the trials that are open in prostate cancer in the United States right now. I couldn't even show you the ones that are open in New England or even at my institution and Dr. Lee's institution. There are just too many, which is a good thing for people with prostate cancer. But we need people to enroll in these trials, and we need doctors to encourage that and to make that possible. So fendtrials.com is a wonderful resource that goes through clinical trial basics. It goes through with a search and finder where you can find these trials in your regions and how you can get involved. And it even classifies things by prostate cancer diagnosis. And we're going to hear more about this in just a minute. But I just want you to know, even as a physician, I can go into the government database. You can too, clinicaltrials.gov, and look for things. This is far easier. It is a fantastic resource. So in summary, clinical trials need people from different races so doctors and patients understand treatment effects in all patients. And Black participants have not been included in trials at the rates they deserve. Lack of inclusion in trials extends from treatment trials to real-world trials, genetic studies, cohort studies, registries, surveys, you name it. Get involved if you feel you can. And ongoing trials to watch include all of those that I mentioned and so many more. fendtrials.com is a wonderful resource to find trials for you or your loved one. So please check it out. And I will stop with that. Thank you. Oh, Keith, I can't hear you. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Thank you again. And um, Dr. Lee allowed us to understand that we have this plethora of treatment options, and then you just open the door to significant impacts that are going to take place in the future. What's interesting is this whole issue of moving the treatment options from metastatic castration-resistant disease up to your earliest point. Is that going to make a significant impact, do you think?
I think it will. You know, we've been doing that for many years because drugs are usually developed in the sickest, most vulnerable patients because there's always a risk with any new drug that it will not be as effective as we need it to be, it's not going to be good enough. And so it's always tested sort of at the end as the last resort for folks when people feel like they want those options. And it's a good thing because we need options for those people. And when we find that they work in that setting, we always move it forward. But what you're saying is really important because when we move forward into people who are healthier and healthier and the disease is earlier and earlier, we usually find that these drugs are far more effective and have far more bang for their buck because people are healthier and the disease is more vulnerable. It has fewer mutations. It's not as advanced and as strong. And so it can be really, really effective to move it forward earlier and earlier.
And thank you. And there's the question about this. You said radioligand therapies. Is that under the field of radioimmunotherapies? And are other therapies should patients be looking for?
So immunotherapy is a little bit separate than radioligand therapy. Immunotherapy is usually used as a term to characterize treatments that try to either rev up your own immune system or harness your own immune system to attack the cancer. And most radioligand therapies are actually delivering radioactive particles directly to the cancer cells. Your immune system may get involved when those cancer cells start dying, but the main purpose of those cells is not to target the immune system. So they're kind of different things, but both are being investigated in prostate cancer. What I would say is that some of the more complex immunotherapy approaches, things like CAR Ts and BiTE therapies,
Right.
are some of the ones that are a little more challenging for people to take, that you have to give them in the hospital. They can have more side effects and they can be a little bit just more difficult for a patient to take. So those are often reserved or tested more in people who are young, healthy, who have fewer medical problems. Radioligand therapies, I think, are so promising because they can be given to people who are older, may have more medical problems, maybe more frail, maybe can't take all those side effects, but the treatment is still effective and doesn't necessarily come with the same burdens for many patients.
Okay. And so my last point was, um, it- what would you want to say to the prostate cancer survivor and the caregivers about the future and having them control what they can control, their health, and what's coming over the horizon, some of the therapies that you're evaluating for the next year or for the future. What would your message be to them?
I would say that I have never been so excited to be involved in the care of people with prostate cancer because of the options that are out there, the ones that are currently available, but all of the ones that I can see from the horizon, see on the horizon. I feel like there's just a whole arena of opportunity available to us. But the challenge is that these could all die on the vine if we don't actually have people who engage in those clinical trials, or they may be developed and we won't fully understand how they may help certain people even more than others or less, or they may have specific side effects that we need to be aware of in certain populations, but we won't know that if everybody doesn't get involved. So I am so excited for the opportunity and see that it is everywhere around us. And just ask everyone to keep an open mind. You hear an opportunity for a clinical trial, ask, tell me more. And if it's not the right trial for you, because most trials are not for everybody, they're for some people, then ask about the next one and the next one, the next one, because there may be a trial for you, or there may be a registry or a survey study or something, some way that you can engage so that your voice is heard and that questions are actually addressing you and your cancer more than just the people at large.
Okay. One other point I wanted to bring up was you mentioned that you use or advise people to take a look at fendtrials.com. And so you find it of benefit as a clinician because I know you have a lot of work. You may not be able to keep up with every single solitary clinical trial that's out there. But does Fend Trials or Find Your Trial tool or the Fend Trials website a benefit to just helping you educate your patients?
It is. I think that it is highly inclusive of many trials. And it's also presenting trials as an overall concept to help people understand what is a clinical trial, what does that look like? It gives background on different trials so that I can understand and patients can understand in lay language, what does it mean to me? What is this actually investigating? What is the burden for me in terms of visits? What are they trying to figure out? It is also really helpful because one of the challenges with clinical trials and with websites that try to share these opportunities with patients is that it can be very unclear what is available to you as an individual. And prostate cancer has so many nooks and crannies, so many different little characterizations or categorizations, I should say, about specific populations of people with prostate cancer. And what this website tries to do is say, okay, you have localized cancer, this is for you. You have more advanced cancer, this is for you. And it tries to break it down so that there's less confusion and then less sort of going down the wrong path and spending a lot of energy in the wrong direction when if you're directed in the right way, you're going to find things more effectively. And this is a way to do that.